Hello and welcome to Property Question Time, the show where all your questions about property are answered by our panel of experts. I'm Lucia France, and joining me in the studio today we have Tony Gimple, who is the founding director of Less Tax for Landlords. Welcome, Tony. We've also got Joanna Leggett, founding partner of Leggett Immobilier, and Paul Mahoney as well, Managing Director of Nova Financial Group. So welcome everybody and thanks for joining us today. As we haven't got much time, we will just crack on with the first question to you, Tony. So, as a moderately successful landlord, I recently went to a seminar about becoming an expat, but whilst living in the sun and not paying any tax seems like a good idea, I'm worried that I might still be subject to UK tax. What would you advise? Where to start?
Somewhere the sun shines all the year round and the sea is warm would be good for a start.
Definitely.
Becoming an expat is a lovely dream, but if you've got any intention whatsoever of returning home, if you've got family here, if you've got properties here, you are still going to be subject to UK taxes. Right. Being an expat is a much misunderstood subject. And there's a limited number of days you can spend here a year before you're deemed domicile or resident, and both of those terms have complexities with them. With all of this, you've got to look at your motivations, and if it's solely about paying tax, you're making the wrong decision. And certainly since the Panama Papers scandal, there are real problems. If you want to go, you're giving up everything in the UK, you're going to live, be resident, domicile somewhere else, then yeah, get on with it. But if there's any intention to return or you're going to have a property here, then you will find yourself still in the UK tax trap.
And I think, well, here they do seem to think, they actually say, whilst living in the sun and not paying any tax seems like a good idea. I mean, wouldn't they have issues, even if they did completely leave the UK, they'd still have to pay tax in wherever they move to?
Depends where they move to, but generally speaking, yes. Some countries offer great deals. I think Portugal gives you tax-free for 10 years on anything earned outside of Portugal.
Right, okay.
Others, you can buy a passport and get certain deals. But in order to live in anything approaching a civilized country, you've got to pay a modicum of tax to keep the lights on and so on.
And also for healthcare systems,
yep.
For example, in France, to become a French resident, you need to be there at least 183 days. Right. And if you want to get into the healthcare system, you've obviously got to be paying some sort of tax. And then you've got to also think about if you do have homes in two countries, one of them is your main residence. When you sell the other one, you're going to be liable for capital gains tax. Yeah. So that's the other option to look at, which country is going to offer the best for that.
Correct.
And why is it, do you think, that people do have this kind of sort of rosy view of moving abroad like that? It is all tax-free. Obviously things have changed, haven't they?
I wouldn't say that, our clients particularly, the reasons people come to France is for the lifestyle. It's certainly not for the tax, because sometimes the taxes can be higher than what they are in the UK in certain fields. But France is mainly about lifestyle, so I don't think it's all about tax.
Yeah. You also get to a point, like me, coming up to 59, where actually the thought of being in the sun more than the cold is very appealing.
Definitely, yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, Joanna, another French property question here for you. So I've heard that house prices in France escalated last year. I was thinking of buying, but have I missed the boat for getting a good investment property in France?
You certainly haven't missed the boat, because if you bear in mind the prices haven't gone up at all in probably nearly 8 to 10 years. So they really were at rock bottom. And it's the same with, say, in London, for example. Some areas will go up and other areas won't. As a whole, they've gone up about 7% across the country. Some areas haven't gone up at all, and you can still get some really good bargains. But if you're looking for an investment property, then you probably are going to be in areas that are going up, so now would be the time to buy. Because not all of France is good for investment. It is a lifestyle choice, as I was saying earlier. But areas like the ski resorts, where you've got all year round rental, Paris, the Côte d'Azur, where there's holiday rental, all throughout the year, they're good areas for investment, but the prices are still still very, very low compared to other countries, so it's still a very good time to buy.
And do you see that same sort of percentage increase happening again this year or over the next couple of years?
They're gradually going up. They're gradually going up. You know, interest rates are as low as they ever have been, so a lot of the French are buying properties where they may have been renting before. So this is making, you know, the property market prices go up slightly. They're not going to go up dramatically, but they are still going up quite, you know, slowly.
Yeah, sort of
so
creeping
it's
up
still a
kind of
very,
thing.
very good time to buy. It's a buyer's market.
And would you say that those areas where you think it's better for an investment property, like you mentioned, Paris and anywhere around the Alps and things like that, are they going to go up more sharply? Or
No, it's quite steady in France. You don't get the peaks and troughs like you do in the UK, massive highs and massive lows. It is quite smooth. So I think you know, I wouldn't worry at the moment. But if you were looking at perhaps 5 years' time, then yes, of course, the properties will be a lot higher then.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Thank you very much, Joanna. Okay. So your question here, Paul. I'm in the process of remortgaging a property and changing from a personal mortgage to a buy-to-let mortgage. Also in this process, I'm looking to add my partner onto the mortgage. Will there be stamp duty owed on my partner's half of the property if we do this?
Okay, so they currently own the property on their own. They're changing from a residential mortgage to a buy-to-let and adding their partner in the process.
That's right, yeah.
So in adding, firstly, it depends on whether they're married.
Okay.
So if they're
Doesn't
married,
say, I'm afraid.
in the eyes of HMRC, they're considered a joint entity for stamp duty purposes.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be stamp duty payable in adding the partner to ownership. But they only mention about adding them to the mortgage. They will also need to add them as an owner.
Right,
That
okay.
could be either as tenants in common or joint tenants, meaning, you know, tenants in common, they could give them 1% of the property or 99% of the property or whatever they want.
Okay.
It doesn't really, well, it does matter, but that would be determined by what they want to do. And joint tenants would be just 50-50.
Okay.
So if they're married, that's pretty straightforward. A conveyancer can do that for them, and there generally wouldn't be stamp duty payable. If they're not married, then there probably would be, because whether they're selling or gifting, stamp duty would be liable because it's a
separate entity.
It's a separate
kind of thing.
entity gaining ownership. Other things to consider is they said they're changing from a resi to a buy-to-let. I assume that means they've got another place to live.
It must. I
It
mean,
must
yeah.
do.
Again, it doesn't say, but I imagine
Because
so.
a lot of lenders are very sceptical of people that just change from residential to buy-to-let if they haven't bought elsewhere.
Right.
And even if they have bought elsewhere, they'd need to prove they're actually going to go and live there.
Okay.
Because sometimes people will do what's called a backdoor buy-to-let,
Right.
meaning they get a buy-to-let mortgage, but then they go and live in the property. The reason they'd sometimes do that is it's easier to get a buy-to-let mortgage than a residential mortgage.
Oh, right. But
so
if you were found to be doing that.
Well, it
What
would be
would be the
it would be you'd be breaking the terms of the mortgage, so the lender could recall the mortgage. You know, it's technically not legal. They wouldn't sue you for it, but they would be within their rights to recall the mortgage and force you to repay it straight away.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So probably not a good idea. So if this particular person, if they aren't married, if they and their partner aren't married, would you say, let's get the wedding bells going?
It depends on what the stamp duty is. I don't think they mention the value of the property, but if it's a high value property, the stamp duty could be fairly significant.
Yeah.
If it's low value, it could be, you know, fairly insignificant.
Okay.
So yeah,
So it
that
depends on the price.
depends
of
on
the
the
property.
price of the property as to what the liability would be.
And if there's a mortgage, the consideration for stamp duty purposes is in effect the mortgage. And the joint tenants and tenants in common, typically when setting up as tenants in common, so you've got two separate personalities, it would be 50-50, and you can split it either ways. But for equalising the income using something called Form 17, the split doesn't matter, because I can own 99%, Paul can own 1%, but I can still allocate 99% of the income using Form 17. Right. What they'll have to do if they do go down the tenancy in common route, critical they have wills, and critical they have lasting powers of attorney for their property and financial affairs, because if they're not quite dead but not quite alive, a spouse or civil partner or just somebody you're shacked up with or in business with can't sign on your behalf without going to the Court of Protection, which used to be known as the Masters of Lunacy. And actually one might say it hasn't changed that much in terms of the bureaucracy.
Right. Okay. So supposing that was the case and they aren't married, just definitely make sure you get all your affairs like will, etc. in order.
And it also raises the question as to why they're adding the partner. If they're not married, adding a partner to a to ownership and to a mortgage makes that partner jointly and severally liable for that mortgage.
Right.
If they split up, that can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Why they do it, they don't say why, but
No.
it's worth asking the question as to what the logic is to doing it.
Yeah.
And you get the same thing when you try and give property to children. You get exactly those same problems cropping up. Forget the tax. If the child screws up, gets divorced, goes bankrupt, whatever, you've suddenly lost the asset. It can be really problematic.
We do have that problem in France as well, whereby the parents put it into the children's name, and then but they're living there as residents. Now, they wouldn't have to pay capital gains if they sold it, but the children do because they don't live there. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas actually here,
Yeah.
there'd still be a potential CGT liability even
Yeah.
if no money changes hands.
Right,
Because
they-
it's consideration.
Yeah.
And there are inheritance tax issues here by doing that.
And I guess if people don't know that, they think they're helping their children out and they think they're doing the right thing.
Well,
but-
the children in France would inherit it anyway, up to 100,000 per child. So if there was 200,000 and 2 children, they wouldn't have to pay anything. They would inherit it naturally.
Well, good to know anyway. Right, that's all we've got time for, guys, for this half. Thank you very much, and we'll be back very shortly after this break. Hello and welcome back to Property Question Time. Joining me in the studio today we have Tony Gimple, Joanna Leggett and Paul Mahoney. Thanks for joining us again, guys, and we'll get straight in with the next question to you, Tony. Someone's been very lucky here. I've been lucky enough to receive a substantial windfall, somewhere in the region of 1.5 million.
Wow.
And have for a long time wanted to build a property business that will provide work and income for my family long after I've gone. I'm happy to pay some tax, basic rate would be good, but have been told that my heirs will have to pay 40% inheritance tax when I do. Surely this can't be right. I'll be running this as a business and thought that businesses don't pay IHT. Am I wrong? Now, please, can you also clarify here, Tony, what IHT is as well?
Inheritance tax.
Right.
That's just the shorthand for it. Inheritance tax. Wow. State-sponsored grave robbery. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. Deliberately penalising the next generation for all your hard work. It's nothing new. It's been around for donkey's years, since Roman times and before. Do businesses pay inheritance tax? Trading businesses do not. So, property TV, the corner shop, running a professional property business won't pay inheritance tax.
Right.
If, however, the business is structured the wrong way, particularly when it comes to property, you'll be deemed to be running an investment business. And particularly if you buy through a limited company, where the sole purpose is to collect rents for 12 months or more, it is an investment company. So outside of all of your personal allowances, typically 650,000 for a married couple, rising to $1 million in 2021 if they're giving part of their main residence to direct descendants, every £1 million of equity will be subject to £400,000 in inheritance tax.
Wow, that's a lot.
And if there's a change of government lurching to the left, you can bet your bottom dollar, if there is still one left in the economy at that point, that tax will rise.
Right.
So they've got to be really careful how they structure it.
So in this instance then, what advice could you give them in terms of it not being an investment business and it being, a trading business? Or can they sort of change that in terms of how it's perceived?
Yes, they can. And it all comes back to some of the things we've covered in earlier programs about not being driven by tax, but for good business reasons. And HMRC currently will treat income into limited liability partnerships as trading income.
Okay, so that would be your advice to this particular person who's received that?
I'd say so. Well, actually, my particular advice is, if you just had £1.5 million tax-free windfall, go and have some fun.
Just to comment on that, so far as how they're actually going to invest the money as well. It's important that they invest it in the right way, not just structure it in the right way. Structuring probably should come first. What's my strategy going to be? How am I going to structure it all? But then how actually am I going to invest that money? Right. And there's various different ways you can invest £1.5 million. Some not so great for what they're looking to do, and obviously other ways that you can structure it that would work really well for what they're looking to do so far as providing work and an income for their family. So seeking advice on that, on how to structure it all, and not just going down to the local estate agent and buying 5 properties on your own street, going about it, as Tony said, as a business, and what makes the most sense to provide the goals that they're working toward.
So just certainly seek advice on that before they go ahead and spend any of that money.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, guys. Okay, moving on to Joanna now. Your next question. I'm buying a property with friends. Ooh. I recently heard about something called SCI. Can anyone tell me what it is, please?
Yes, an SCI is quite common if friends are buying together, or perhaps brothers and sisters or family members. It means Société Civile Immobilier. It's a non-trading company, but different people can have different shares in that property. And what it means is if, for example, 2 couples bought the property together, they'd all have 25% shares. And say, for example, as in our CEO's case, he wanted to sell or buy his friends out, they could easily just buy the shares out, and the company just becomes in 2 people's name as opposed to 4.
Okay.
But I would definitely take legal advice if you were going to set this up, because in some instances people have made the mistake, as we said earlier, by putting the children in the SCI because they want them to inherit it, but they don't need to, because if the property, if it's 100,000 per child, they don't need to put it in an SCI. They will automatically get it tax-free. So it's worth looking into. I would suggest that they take advice from an accountant or the notaire directly, and the notaire can help with the procedure of setting up the documents for an SCI as well.
Okay, and I mean, we've talked in previous programmes, I know, about buying properties with friends and brothers and sisters, or things like that. Do you advise against it as a general rule, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, you'd have to have a very good relationship and have known your friends for a long time. It sometimes means, particularly if it's a holiday home, you're not going to be using it all year round, and it gives both couples the opportunity. It's getting used more. They're not paying rent on the property. There's no income from the property. They're not paying tax on any rental income because they're sharing the costs as such. There's lots of benefits, but of course, if you do fall out, that's an issue, all over really. But yeah, we don't really have a view, and a lot of people do it in France. There's quite a lot of SCI set up, and then you can easily buy people out if they want to move on, or other people can buy in and buy the shares in. So perhaps another brother might buy them off another brother and become part of that shareholding. And you can have one or more properties in an SCI. It's not just for one property. You could hold other properties in that SCI as well.
The other thing to be careful of is if you're buying property outside of the UK, you need to have a will and power of attorney in that jurisdiction. Any UK estate planning should be solely based for UK assets, because trying to get the French to agree to anything that comes from this side of the channel, let alone agree in probate on a will, where you've got 2 radically different legal systems, can be exceptionally difficult.
Yeah, they have actually changed the system slightly in the respect that you can respect English laws. So if you wanted to leave the property to the donkey's home, you can do, but don't be mistaken that because before you couldn't, it had to go to your children, you couldn't disinherit your children. But now you can leave it to the donkey's home, but you've got to remember that it doesn't matter who you're leaving it to, you're still subject to French tax, and that could be 65% for the donkey home to pay, whereas if it was to your children, they wouldn't have that amount.
And there's a difference between can and will.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
but they're
very lucky donkeys.
Yeah, but it's a very good point. It's very important if you do buy a property abroad to make a will with the notaire. In our sense in France, when you buy the property, set up and make a will of how you want that property to be left on death.
And as ever, as we say so often with this show, just make sure you've got all of those things tied up before any problems arise.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Okay, moving to you, Paul. Hello, I have 3 properties which I rent out. Currently, I'm overpaying on the interest only buy-to-let mortgage that I have had the longest and I have the most equity in. Excuse me. My 3rd and latest property is the smallest in value, and subsequently I have less equity in it, but it has the smallest mortgage against it, as it is a 2-bedroom end of terrace. I was thinking about stopping my overpayment and start overpaying on the 3rd smallest property as stated in the previous paragraph. My thoughts are that I would be mortgage free on one of my properties and be able to start overpaying on the next property with the lowest mortgage. What's your advice, please?
Okay.
Complicated question there, but
Yeah, well, I get the logic so far as trying to get one property debt free but I think it's probably more of a sort of mental relief thing as opposed to something that makes sense financially.
Right.
I would say look at all three and determine which one you're paying the highest interest rate on and pay that one off.
Okay.
You know, because you want to, they said they've got three and it seems like they potentially are live-in one by the sounds of it.
Yes, I think so.
And the two are buy-to-lets.
Yeah.
For, you know, depending on the scenario, generally buy-to-let mortgages in some respect are tax deductible, whereas your home loan wouldn't be. But in some cases, maybe the interest rate on the home loan might be less than the interest rate on the buy-to-lets. So it would be about working out, inclusive of tax savings or cost, what financially, year on year, would be best to get rid of, and directing their overpayments toward that mortgage, and then working through them, you know, sequentially in that order, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's more about not looking at which is the lowest mortgage in terms of money owed. It's more about how the
because if let's say they've got two £100,000 mortgages, they owe 300 grand. Sorry, three £100,000 mortgages, they owe 300 grand.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they owe. One might be on 2% interest rate, one might be on 3, one might be on 4. Obviously, very simply, you would want to get rid of the one that you're paying 4% on, but then you need to take into account the tax considerations as well.
Yeah.
So probably speak with either your accountant, financial advisor, mortgage broker, work out how you can save yourself the most using that extra money that they have available.
And in terms of these buy-to-let mortgages, would you say that would be, if they were thinking of buying any more property, to keep that kind of system going, or would you recommend a different type of mortgage?
So far as the extra payments?
Yes.
Yeah, so quite often we come across people who are saving money to invest whilst they've still got mortgages, and they're putting their money into a bank account, getting 0.5% interest on it, but they're paying 4% on their mortgages. You can pay extra off your mortgages and then remortgage that property to pull equity out to invest. So by putting your money into your mortgages, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not locked up forever. You could always remortgage to get that out at some point in the future if you wanted to continue to build.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. That's all we've got time for today. So thank you to all our guests, Paul Mahoney, Joanna Leggett and Tony Gimple. And thank you at home for watching. If you've got any questions you'd like to send in and get answered for yourselves, go to the website property-tv.co.uk, or you can email us info@propertytelevision.tv. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.